Good morning, everyone. I guess that works for the sound check. Welcome to this session. If you haven't seen it just yet, Cloud Strategies for Equity Evaluation and Investor Readiness. We have three panelists, including myself, up here today. So we're going to be talking about cloud strategies specifically. The concept of valuation for companies has or can be measured in a variety of ways. What we're going to be talking about today is going to be how investors look at the cloud strategy and how that builds value through innovation, agility, reduced costs, and things of that nature. So if this isn't the session, then now's the time to make it out. The interesting thing about AWS is that we have a lot of customers that have delivered disruption. Many of these are disruptive leaders. What comes with that, of course, with that level of success is equity events or our equity events. And equity events can, of course, come in any form. It could be a merger and acquisition, VC funding, private equity funding, IPO, SPAC. Our customers, having gone through those and requesting some assistance from us in terms of helping them organize and evaluate their cloud strategy, has allowed AWS to help them get through these events. So what we've done is we've created a number of different tools and practices within AWS. Our partners as well also offer many of these same tools and consulting strategies that are helpful to companies that are going to be pursuing something in the future. What you can do if you are one of those companies that foresees something coming up in the next quarter, 4 quarters, 6 quarters, there's no time like the present to prepare for something of that nature and really understand what your cloud strategy is, get your hands around it, and have a better chance of earning trust with your investors, organizing your team with the right messaging behind what exactly is your cloud value, and how does cloud deliver more value as time goes on. So with that, I'm going to introduce, I'm going to go to talk a little bit about why cloud strategy is something that investors are very much interested in. And there's 100 or 1,000 studies that you can look at that have proven the point that agility and speed have helped investors bring value utilizing the cloud to their companies. And that's why you see so much skin in the game on the part of investors, whether they're VC or private equity, family funds, angel investors, et cetera. They're looking to the cloud as a way to quickly go in, build in some value, innovate, and deliver results. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists here. Sorry, I've been silent for the whole time. Thank you. First is Tara French, and then Praveen Akitaju. Tara, could you talk a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you got here, what you do, and then Praveen, please.
Sure. So Tara French, Executive Director of Technology Diligence with Vista Consulting Group, which is the value creation and advisory arm of Vista Equity Partners. Vista Equity Partners is the most active investor in the enterprise software market. That's been the singular focus for us for the last 2 decades, and over that time, we have about 88 portfolio companies and around $96 billion in assets under management. My primary role is to support M&A activities across all of our funds. And I do that by assessing, opportunities to look at people, technologies, processes, and identify risks, remediation, and opportunities for further growth. I have been with Vista about 5 years now, and in that time, I've done about 400 to 450 diligence activities. So looking forward to just a little bit. Looking forward to taking some of the learnings that I've seen over the last 5 years, the trends we've seen in the cloud, and sharing some of that with the group today.
Great.
Awesome. Praveen Akiraju, I'm a managing director with Insight Partners, based out of San Francisco Bay Area. At Insight, basically, we're a full stack investor all the way from Series A through to to the growth stage, and as well as some private equity investments as well. Inside my role primarily is to focus on enterprise infrastructure investments. So, in cybersecurity space, process automation, developer ecosystem, the data stack. These are areas that I spend time in. It's been an interesting time at Insight as well as the broader community as such. And I think part of sort of what Insight's really been good at, and some of my colleagues are here from these groups, is to really be able to kind of help our companies through their development lifecycle all the way from the early stage to growth. Prior to Insight, I was an operator. I was basically ran engineering teams at Cisco for a long time. And then my last operating role was CEO of a startup called Viptela, which was built on AWS and was an edge computing platform, which we ended up being acquired by Cisco before I moved over to the investing side.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm Tony Cicada. I've been with AWS for about 3 years now. I head up a program called Equity Valuation Readiness, and it's something that we have organized just to assist our customers in terms of a quick strategy check for getting prepared for an equity event in the future. Also help out on the M&A side, but we have a practice over here at AWS on that as well. We're going to go ahead and jump into the questions. And the great thing about this panel is Tara, representing a well-known private equity company, deals with a lot of mature companies that are going into the private equity route, whereas Praveen has a lot of day-to-day interaction with more of the young startups. So we'll have a good variety of answers in the questions. So let's go ahead and take the first one. Last year was a record-setting for funding. Previous years as well. How's it been in 2022, and how have investors tackled the challenges? Would you like to go first, Praveen?
Sure, yeah. As I guess Charles Dickens would say, is the best of times, is the worst of times. It's the spring of hope and the despair of winter, right? It almost feels that way. But, I think if you kind of look at the broader picture, we had sort of an amazing sort of macro environment that drove a lot of capital into technology development, and we had a tremendous amount of innovation and disruption in the technology space as well. COVID accelerating a lot of that. So I think we just had this amazing burst of innovation and investor funding in the 2021 timeframe, and I think 2022 really was sort of a time for us to digest collectively, right, as sort of a community, to kind of digest all of that and really start to focus on, what really matters, which is delivering customer value. So if maybe you could double click on that, I think there are like 3 ways that I think about what changed between 2021 to 2022. At the sort of top level, you talk about sort of the public markets, which set the tone in a lot of sense for how we think about sort of the ecosystem in the startup community, right? So at peak, Snowflake, which is an amazing company, right, was, I think December of 2021 was valued at 52 times forward earnings, right? And they were growing at literally 100% year over year, basically $1 billion in revenue. So today their valuation is around 15x, right? So we went from like 52 to 15x in terms of the same metric, which is the enterprise value relative to the forward earnings. And so if you take that as sort of a data point, that kind of gives you a sense for sort of how the overall sort of way investors view the market and valuations kind of now looks, right? So there's a significant correction, most profoundly felt by the companies that are in the later stages of their evolution, less so for some of the early stage startups. And that brings me to the second point, which is, how 2022 feels really depends on which stage startup you are, right? If you're an early stage startup that kind of raised capital the last 12 months, you're probably heads down, just focused on what you've always been working on, which is delivering great customer value. You probably have to pull up your socks and fight harder for that customer, to deliver that customer value now than you had to last year. But to a large extent, I think a lot of companies that were founded in the last, or raised capital in the last 12 months, in the early stages, are just basically heads down. If you're later stage, I think you have a different profile. Perhaps you're scaling. You're sort of on your scale curve, so you're perhaps spending more capital on go-to-market to be able to get to that scale. So you have some tougher decisions to make, right? So what we as investors are doing right now is to really sit down with our portfolio companies, depending on the stage, and help them through that process. And it's where, as I mentioned, Insight's sort of capability around helping our companies through the life cycle really comes to play. The third part is the customer piece, right? And there's been a significant change in terms of how customers, buyers, right, are now view the ecosystem. The one thing's for sure, there's no stopping the technology disruption that's happening, which is, I think, the great thing. You see that today on the shop floor at this event as well. I think we will probably continue to accelerate the rate of disruption of technology, and that essentially is central to a lot of ways customers look at things. However, I think they are making a lot more focused decisions, right, on is this the technology, do I need it? How much of this do I need, right? And so we see a lot of active scrutiny, whereas in the past, maybe, they would take a chance on a startup and say, yeah, sure, and it sounds like an interesting tool. So now, if you're a startup, you really need to sharpen your pencil and make sure that you're truly speaking to the customer value and you understand the customer journey as they, go from adoption through to scale. Sorry, long answer.
Oh, no, that's great.
And if I can add to that, that part about the product strategy is a piece that we've been looking at more carefully as we look at sort of the trends of how we're assessing. You want to make sure that it's aligning to the market trends, it aligns to where your competitors are, and do you have a full strategy that aligns to that, not just from the product, but also from the technology roadmap and where you're going. So, that's definitely a change that we've seen that aligns to, the later stage still have to get that story right and understand what that longer term trajectory looks like.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, that's something that we hear a lot, is that hold times for many of the investors are extending now because of the lack of exits. Certainly a huge pause on IPOs this past year. Okay, great. For the next one, what key technology and market areas are you invested, and what role does cloud play? Tara, would you like to jump on that one?
I'll start. And I mentioned it in the beginning, so Vista only focuses on enterprise software. So it's not so much a specific sector. I mean, we're always looking across all of the different industries. In fact, we have about, I think, 30 plus industries represented in inside of our portfolio. So for us, it's more about understanding sort of how is the alignment and the full vision and strategy, and how does cloud enable that? So if you think about some of the investment levers you can pull for growth, I can give a few examples. If you're looking to go global and have new regions that are outside of North America, for example, we look at how easy is that for you to actually stand up those environments and support it. Now, obviously, there's the architecture piece, whether or not you're multilingual and you can do all those things, But once we get through that, having environments that are easily spun up, that can mimic and already look like and take advantage of the core governance and implementation that you have, that is it's more impactful and less of a runway, right, to possibly do that. And when you think about data privacy laws and local data retention and those different factors that come in, using a cloud to do it, we see that as an easier hill to climb. Another example of how we see cloud as an enabler, a lot of time we're looking at companies that are going to look to expand their market share, expand their customer base. Usage on their platform is going to grow. So when you think about scalability, if your cloud is implemented and instrumented correctly, you should be able to have some elasticity. You're able to use auto scaling groups up and down and also adjust. Once again, it's still rooted in the architecture of your platform, but being able to scale and understanding the challenges on the data layer, on your services, on data transfer, these things become an easier conversation when you're already rooted in something like a cloud platform.
Okay, Praveen?
I think that makes a ton of sense. Right? I mean, architecture matters when you're building the product, right? I think when we look at technology, you kind of look at sort of innovation happens in transitions, right? And if you kind of go back the last few years, there was a fundamental question that was asked, which is, for every application, what is core, what is context, right? And I think that question fundamentally changed the way enterprises thought about sort of rolling out these applications. And I think the advent of the cloud effectively enabled startups to be able to build really compelling solutions or even reimagine, right, existing paradigms and solutions with this sort of core versus context discussion, right? So take away all the context, run it on a public cloud. Why do you have to worry about infrastructure if you are essentially focused on productivity or process automation, right? So we saw not only sort of the architecture change, but the economics change, right? Consumption models change, business models change. So I think when we think about sort of how we approach technology, we're looking for that. We look at companies that are sort of catching that transition, right? Is there something fundamentally different where they are reimagining, could be an existing solution? Same thing happened in the data space. We've always had lots of data, right? I mean, it was called databases, it was called big data, now it's called machine learning, tomorrow's going to be called something else, right? The fact is that we always had data, we had lots of data. It was just stuck in different silos.
Data
right?
texture.
Yeah.
Data texture.
And so now you have platforms like AWS, which allows you to kind of have access to your data for any application from anywhere. And more importantly, a set of algorithms and ways to access and operationalize that data, right? So that was sort of an inflection point, which then kind of triggered a bunch of innovation and a set of companies that we look at and say like, wow, this company is, yes, they may be solving something really mundane like, accounts payable or, financial accounting. But, the way they're solving that is in a fundamentally different way because they're taking advantage of that technology transition. So for us, investing really is about identifying companies that are in that transition that we can then look at that and say like, all right, so this is a fundamentally different value proposition to the end customer. Because ultimately, I'm a product guy, so my entire career has been building products. So I always look at it from how do you move the needle for the customer? Is the pain of moving to your product going to be lesser than the value that you're going to be able to deliver? That's a fundamental equation.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that innovation happens in stages, so oftentimes companies will have established programs for innovation, like experimentation, sandboxes, that type of thing.
Right.
Others will just kind of do it ad hoc. Do folks look at anything specific to innovation in early and middle, later stage companies?
So I'll say from our perspective, we're always interested in understanding, are you constantly looking for opportunities to find new ways to serve your customers and to move your product? And innovation has to be a part of that. I'd be lying if I said everyone has these buttoned up, strategies around it. But we do talk about what are the opportunities, what's the flexibility, and how can you do that without having tremendous impact on your current product and your customer base. So, leveraging things like the cloud where you can have, like you said, sandboxes, or you can spin up little environments and experiment and do things with your data to transfer it and see how you can continue to innovate. We find that to be a positive because every product, like I said, product strategy, where you're going, but then how can you bring innovations in it that will differentiate you in your market against your peers and continue to stabilize for that longer term growth?
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think cloud's been a key enabler here in terms of experimentation, right? So a lot of companies today have a free tier, right? And the only reason they're able to offer a free tier is because they're able to leverage the scale and sort of the economics of a cloud platform. So I think you see essentially a lot of startups engage the user community first through being able to say like, hey, there's some real value here, right? And being able to sort of demonstrate that before they're able to kind of take them up the journey and start to sort of onboard them as customers. I think what you are seeing though as we go into 2022, which is a different kind of climate right now. And I go back to the point I made earlier, which is that sort of value equation becomes extremely important. And so the way, I was just sharing with Tara, I was having, a conversation with one of my founders yesterday evening, which was talking about sort of how do you think about pricing. And so the way you distribute the value between your different tiers, between your free tier and your business tier and your enterprise tier, now you have to rethink that because I think, in order for you to demonstrate that value, perhaps, you change that equation a little bit. But, again, the cloud enables you to drive that level of experimentation and, being able to kind of learn with your customers, right, as you go along.
And one thing to add to that, and maybe more specifically about AI/ML and how we see that being played out with leveraging the cloud. years ago, and I've done it myself. You'd put in an order with IT for GPU, you'd look at how much it costs, whether or not it gets there is a different question. We see companies that have a lot of data, which is something we talk about. A cloud environment at least allows you to start that experimentation without really high overhead to figure out how you can start training on models, leveraging some already off-the-shelf things, but you can build infrastructure for your model training, for your inference, for your ML ops. You can start to build that at a lower cost and easier one way. So if you want to innovate, you have a large data set or something that might be differentiated that you can start to do learning on and find some automation through. We find that the cloud and having a cloud environment makes it easier to start building it out. Now, obviously, you have to align that to all of the different things that you have to balance, but being able to spin up these environments and take advantage of what's already there in services is a great opportunity. And we see that in other areas. This is just one example of it, but what we found is a lot of conversations start with, I know I have this thing and I have to figure out how to get some POCs around it and start the process. You could build that into your product roadmap and your tech roadmap and leverage these environments and the services available to get a runway on it.
Great.
Let's probably make one more point in terms of the technology disruption, right, as relates to the cloud. Particularly in the notion of in this realm of security, right? Security is sort of this constant kind of back and forth game between the bad actors and the good guys, if you will. And I think with cloud, while it has unlocked tremendous amount of potential, tremendous amount of sort of scale and speed. It has also opened up a completely different sort of surface area for threats, right? And so, talking about technology areas that we look at, each of these inflection points, even with data, it's created a lot of it's enabled a lot of different ways of operationalizing things, but now you have to rethink, every time you go through one of these innovation cycles, you have to kind of rethink your foundational elements of the architecture, right? Sure. How are you protecting this? And how do you kind of govern this? And how do you make sure, now especially with a lot of the regulation that you were talking about, right? How do you sort of firewall these things? So, and I think that's a wonderful thing about the space that we are in, right? Because we're in this constant sort of technology, disruption cycle, innovation is constant, right? So irrespective of whether, the markets are high or down, I think, folks in the audience here, the founders, don't rest, right?
Sure.
It keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, and on security, I've often heard that, AWS can build a castle, right? But if a customer leaves the door bridge open, okay, for S3 bucket open, for example, then your castle's only as secure as that. Okay, so what do you think companies can expect from investor scrutiny, especially as you had mentioned previously, Praveen? This year, it seems like folks are tightening down a little bit more in terms of due diligence on the business as well as the technical side, possibly. So. Would you like to? Yeah,
I can start and we can talk about the business aspect of it. Interestingly enough, about 5 or 6 years ago, when we started conversations of looking at across platforms and all the pieces that make it up, infrastructure was a discussion more about, do you even have presence in the cloud? Have you thought about a migration? What's your TCO? We saw a lot of that as the transition out of data centers, at least, like I said, 6, 7 years ago, was still happening. But nowadays, looked at some numbers, right? It's about 94% of enterprise companies have some sort of service that's based in the cloud, right? It could be IT, it could be an application to help business operations, but there's some presence. And then for enterprise software, or enterprise companies, I should say, there's about maybe 67%, 2/3 that have some presence of infrastructure in the cloud. And so when you think about that, our introspection and our assessment has really grown to be a full strategy and a full understanding of your cloud maturity. We've moved from just saying we're in the cloud and we have some regions. We really want to understand how does your product strategy align to your tech strategy that aligns to your infrastructure? So are you able to support the things you want to go do? And do you have a very good understanding of how that all aligns to your business objectives? So these things we see as, it should be a cohesive story and message that builds on each other. But we talk specifically about the cloud. We want to understand the architecture that you've built, the infrastructure, where your data entry points, how do you think about regions and all that? Everyone talks about these things. Availability zones, that's easy. But then we go another level down down, we want to understand your resilience. How are you able to keep your business running? What's your flexibility to scale up and scale down? At the core of it, there's probably three things we'll always talk about: scalability, security, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and then understanding, once again, your ability to be mature and govern your FinOps around your cloud. So, we'll dive in and really take a look at governance. You think about monitoring, you think about how you have visibility into what your usage is, your trends are. We'll look at security, and I will say that's one area that sometimes the answers are, for us, weak, right? There's a lot that goes on. It's a shared model, so you still have to understand your responsibility in the cloud, and as you change and innovate and adjust your architecture and your infrastructure, are you making the right decisions to support that and have a full view of it? Obviously, there's data privacy is a big conversation that we have now, so we want to understand, do you have any governments or regulations that you should be adhering to, and how do you answer and use your infrastructure to support that? And then last but not least, FinOps, which FinOps, I think, is pretty established now. There's a lot of different methodologies around there and ways that you can achieve that. But really, how do you enact it? So do you have automation? Do you have the right monitoring of your costs? Do you understand your trajectory? How do you look at your unit cost, right? How do you look at when you start to grow and expand and see spikes or changes, do you understand where they're coming from so that we can get a sense of the stability in your prediction for your cloud cost? So, I would say at a kind of top level, there's going to be a very full view to understand and get to an idea of your maturity. And that doesn't mean you have to have the answers for everything. I don't expect everyone to be using serverless. Maybe it doesn't work for what you do, but you should have understanding of your positives, your full maturity, and then the gaps and areas that you need to continue to invest in as you grow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think maybe I'll address it from more sort of a structure perspective, right? And the answer really varies based on the stage of the company, right? So if you're an early stage company, I think as an investor, I think our focus primarily is on the product value and the customer adoption. Those really it boils down to that, because you don't have a lot of sort of data or metrics to have a strong sense of where the company's headed. So what we're trying to really figure out is, is the product that the company has built, is that addressing a fundamental value requirement for the customer? Obviously, is it differentiated? And really focus in on the customer's voice, right? Is this a pilot? Is this a adoption in sort of a core area versus a peripheral area? What does the usage pattern of the customer look like on that particular product? Again, thanks to the cloud, all of these metrics are easily available, right? And the customer is pretty aware as well, right? And what's the propensity of the customer to continue to engage with that product and grow, right? So, depending, there's like a whole spectrum of companies. I mean, you have open source companies, you have freemium tiers, so you have a lot of very granular metrics that come out of that allow you to have a good sense of the core question: is this a product worth building? Our customers engaging the product in a long-term sense, right? As you kind of grow up the maturity, right, and sort of in the mid-stage area, you're about, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars in ARR. I think you start to see a little bit more metrics come out. You can see, okay, how's the product being? Is the product expanding in terms of scope and footprint within a company, within a customer? And you really elevate at that point. The real focus is, great, they built a product that a set of customers are using. Now, can this actually be the foundation for an expansion? Do they have a repeatable motion that allows them to be able to get to the next level? So, a lot of metrics there around the pipeline and how they're able to convert the pipeline and such like. By the way, Insight actually has a phenomenal sort of metrics document that I'll refer you guys to. You can go search for it, Scale Up Metrics. Just go to Insight and search for that. It's very, very granular by stage, defines all the metrics that we typically look at. And as you are closer to the growth stage, I think Tara probably has a great perspective on this as well. I think at that point it really is sort of now you're like maybe approaching $100 million in ARR. So here you're really looking at the efficiency of the business, right? Are you, how much are you spending to be able to get this revenue, right? What does your geographic area kind of strategy look like? What does the strength of your team look like, right? So you start to think about more structural things that could influence the trajectory of the company. So, so that's why I think the answer is not a simple one. It really depends on stage, and you need to be able to have the appropriate lens. You can't just go with metrics to an early stage company and say, okay, show me all your whatever, your ARR growth rate, and they may have 18 months worth of product runway there, so it's hard for you to judge that, right? So I think you calibrate between being deeper in the technology and the product in the early side, and perhaps more sort of scale, structure, metrics oriented as you go to the later stage.
Okay, great, thank you. And that's interesting. You mentioned ARR, I know recurring revenue, as opposed to how things were previously measured, like TTM, 12-month trailing revenue, MRR, monthly recurring revenue. So a lot of new things in the cloud. Speaking of metrics, right? What do you typically focus on when it comes to, especially things that may not be product revenue related, other things that are more cloud strategy, practice area related?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. There's a few things outside of the ones you mentioned. Obviously EBITDA it comes up, and Rule of 40, which is common for SaaS companies. But we also look at things like R&D as a % of revenue, and understanding not just the people and the process for your engineering and product development, but also how does your cloud cost, hosting cost, your COGS kind of line up with the revenue, and how does that trajectory look and projection look for where that is. And I think for us, and one of the reasons why cloud becomes a good conversation around this, and if you look back and you talk about data centers and contracts that you have to figure out, and there's a lot of spend on just refreshing hardware, which I've spent time racking them, so I know this new shipment comes in, you got to re-rack it. Now we're looking at how can you look at your footprint and what it is to be able to continue to scale and grow, but at cost and at efficiency, right? So when I think about cloud, those are the things that we do look at, those numbers and metrics, and we want to understand, okay, what has it been in the last 12 months? What are your trailing sort of trends that we've seen? Are you starting new services or new regions that kind of changes what that looks like? And then, I've already mentioned the unit cost, but I think it's an important one to also use as part of the metric. And a lot of companies, even in the older, later stage, as you say, they still don't have a good representation of that. And this is an area that, even if you're a startup, understanding where your costs are coming from and what dynamics play in there to change it. So then when you start looking at your investment model and how you're going to think about your growth levers, you can start to make some decisions and understanding about, if we go expand this way, then this might have an impact. And maybe there's some technical debt or architecture changes we might want to invest in to make sure we can do it at cost. And so this is why, those are the metrics that we see related to cloud and your infrastructure that are important to get to the bottom of. It really can drive the way you think about where you invest and how you invest to support for future growth.
Yeah, I think the point that Tara made is extremely important, right? Understanding sort of your levers of cost is critical. And I think going back to sort of the first question of what's changed between 2021 and 2022, this is basically what's changed.
Yes, I agree.
Right?
It's a big
so as investors, as CEOs and founders, we're really looking at sort of understanding the elements of cost in the business, and being able to sort of attribute that to direct sort of translating that into real value created for the company, right? Because it's when you're raising a lot of money, when you have a lot of sort of customer adoption, the market's generally doing well. Pretty much every company out there tends to overspend. Overspend on marketing, overspend on hiring, overspend on travel, right? I think overall there's just a general sense of more like, okay, let's go get it done, as opposed to the efficiency. And I think now is the time where there's a lot of scrutiny on efficiency up and down, right? I think Tara talked about sort of the product and the architecture and some very important concepts like technical debt, which are which as a product person I fully resonate with. But if you kind of look at metrics at a broad, I would put them in like a couple of categories, right? The first is, general sort of top-level SaaS metrics. What is your ARR growth rate? What is your net retention? What is your gross retention? So this gives you a sense for net new ARR. So, okay, you've grown your ARR from X to Y. What is the composition of that ARR? How much of that is new customers versus how much of that is expansion in your existing customers? That ratio is really important because you got to continue to grow your net new as a way to demonstrate that you're onboarding new customers and you're just kind of selling more to the existing customers. Shows that your product is now expanding, right? So I think that's a key metric. Retention, again, coming back to sort of the customer value, is an extremely important metric, right? And that in a lot of ways, it's sort of it's a number, and sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive, like 130% or 150% retention. But it really gives you a sense for how is the product being adopted and continue to how the customers retaining that product, right? So, there's a corollary to that, which is churn, which you kind of look at as well. So another metric that Tara mentioned, which is important, is the rule of 40, which is more from an efficiency perspective, right? And effectively, this tells you, like, how efficient are you in generating new revenue relative to the cost of generating that revenue, right? And this didn't matter for the last 5 years or so because we were in sort of a different economic environment where growth kind of trumped everything. So now it does matter, right? So how efficiently are you able to add these revenue metrics? So we actually have a much more granular breakdown of sales KPIs, which is really important. So think of this as like a CSI problem, right? So when you kind of look at a company and try to diagnose growth, you have to really get progressively into the next granular level of metrics. You look at that and say, okay, this is what's going on with growth. Okay, net new is growing well or not growing well. Well, why is net new not growing well? Let's go take a look at sort of how the sales team is executing, and then you have a bunch of metrics there, like what is the pipeline? What is the pipeline conversion ratio? What is your sales attainment? Sales AE productivity, right? So you can go, as you go through these, you can then diagnose sort of where the problem is, right? Again, I don't want to kind of go through the laundry list here. This document is actually published on the Insight portal, so you can please go ahead and download it. It's very granular. It actually walks you through sort of one of these examples. But so I think of metrics in terms of broader SaaS metrics, sales metrics, engineering and R&D metrics. And then the last most important thing for me is NPS, right? Yeah, both internally facing and externally facing. So customer NPS is important. It's subjective. Totally get it. Trust me, I've been a CEO of a startup, and I get the frustration with, like, what is this? Your N is so low that, does it even matter, right? But it is important. I think it's a discipline that you hold yourself to as a company to make sure that you understand your customer NPS.
And
right.
To add to that, when we think about NPS from a product and architecture standpoint, we start looking at, are there issues with your performance, latency? Are there things that you should be addressing, not just at the infrastructure level, but also the architecture level, that can lead to customers churning or being unhappy, right? So right. That is an important one that we look at. And maybe one more thing to piggyback off of there. When you think about costs, right, there's also the operational overhead, and how much is it, are you spending to maintain and keep the lights on? And, when you think about the different ways that you can go about doing cloud, in the beginning, there's a lot of infrastructure as a service, just using EC2s. And we're seeing more and recommending more leaning into, platform as a service and SaaS services to support your platform where you can, because that also reduces overhead. So you don't have someone that's literally sitting there patching and figuring out which read replicas to spin up to make sure things are going right. There are advantages as you grow into your cloud maturity. Also looking at opportunities for modernization, optimization. And we've seen, in the early stages, there are a lot of companies that did a rehost, lift and shift. That was quite common. And now we're having discussions around how can you be more, utilize and leverage more native services and move towards more modernization. So I know with a lot of startups, we do support add-ons for our portfolio companies as well. And we will get companies that have just, started in the last year. There, we're seeing an adoption right away. So that overhead and operational just upkeep it becomes easier, and that's another factor that we think about when we think about metrics.
Yeah, and so the last thing from my perspective is very important is your employee NPS,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
We're sort of in a very tough time, right? If across sort of the industry, particularly in teams. Again, I've sort of grown up in the team, so for me, your team essentially is the first and the most important thing. If you don't have a team, you don't have a product, you don't have a business, you don't have customers, et cetera. And so as we're kind of going through this cycle in the industry, broadly speaking, it's really important, particularly now that you have distributed teams and teams that are like, perhaps not in the same room all the time as they used to be. Your ability as a founder, as a CEO, to stay on top of sort of the morale and your and satisfaction of your employees is almost as critical as any of the other metrics mentioned above.
And in terms of scaling out, right, scaling that team, how much impetus are investors these days putting upon, for instance, partners and cloud providers to assist, and especially when there's such a shortage of technical talent?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, and actually, we're sort of in this amazing, event here, right? Where if you're a startup, you have so many resources that you can go to learn, to understand, right, where the edge is, what your competitors are doing, what your customers are looking for. And I think, partners in AWS is a great example of this. Bring a lot more to the table. It used to be, partnership was like really about, okay, I'll provide you access to end customers. I think today partnership is redefined as essentially, helping solve problems together, right? Providing technical solutions, providing, a platform for peer group discussions, right? And being able to move the needle. For us as investors, I think we really value our partnership with AWS and some of the other technology providers as a way to be able to kind of help our startups better understand, right, how they can get the maximum out of, the platforms that they're deploying.
Yeah, and that holds true too for even the our portfolio and what we look at. Cloud vendors and partners offer SMEs that a lot of times have spent deep days and weeks and months into some of these services or strategies that we're trying to deploy. So, we definitely encourage leveraging our partners. We have our own network of partners that we kind of cultivate and build a relationship with to help our portfolio companies when they have to expand or address a problem or look at something that may be outside of the expertise that their team has, to be able to move more quickly, right? I will say this, we encourage for everyone to build their internal capabilities, and there's training, a lot of things available that having someone internal that has that is very important. They translate a little bit of what the advice is that you get and how it relates to your environments and the things that to be very true to your platform. But leveraging, providers and vendors to get to a solution is something that everyone should take advantage of. You're not going to know everything, and there's a lot of changes and evolution in technologies that are happening year over year. Things I knew about some of these cloud services are now no longer true because it's just changed.
Pace is amazing.
The pace is amazing, right? So expecting anyone that's also concentrating on building new features and keeping your platform running and just doing the business to have that same knowledge it's unexpected. You should know that changes are going to happen, and maybe there's an easier way to address something. So we definitely encourage reaching out and looking at partners and our cloud vendors to get advice on these things.
Great. Kind of on that, how do you expect companies to address gaps or immaturity in their strategy? We've talked about companies are all stages of maturity, right? And when it comes to the addressing these gaps, because everybody's going to have gaps, even if you have all the help in the world, at some point there's going to be gaps that are created or that just evolve. So what's the thinking on that?
Yeah, I think I would put this in the sort of core versus context, right? If these gaps are fundamental to your product, security, for example, right? Every product needs to think of security as fundamental to the product. Then I think you need to develop that capability, right? And make sure you're on top of that, right? I think if it's context, you could leverage the platforms that you're built on. Again, AWS has a lot of resources that you could potentially, if you're built on AWS, to be able to leverage to essentially say, hey, how do I get better analytics, or how do I, enable better reporting to my customers and things like that, right? These are things that you can leverage the ecosystem to be able to offer. I think so. You have to break down the gaps in the strategy into specific areas. Is it a product issue? Is it a sales issue? Is it a marketing issue? Is it a people issue, right? And be granular about it. So, but yeah, those are the two frameworks, right? Be granular and really look at it from a core versus context lens. And I think appropriately sort of either build in-house capability or bring in partners. I think again, Insight, we lean into this a lot. We have a lot of amazing resources that are able to kind of come in and sit with and do like a thought exercise with some of our companies to be able to say like, okay, like why are you getting stuck here, right? Why are you not able to break through, to a customer, and how do you kind of work through that?
And I would say, to add on to that, one of the things that we encounter is people not really being aware of what their gaps are. And so outside of what you're saying, I think things like leaning on, and I'll be specific for AWS since we're at this event, your trusted advisor, right? Looking at doing a well-architected review, looking at doing a security snapshot. These are tools that will at least help you understand what parts of your platform and your cloud strategy may be immature or need to be matured. And then you could work with vendors to figure out then how do you go about getting there. Right? There's cost optimization tools and reporting that you can at least get a picture on it. So I think, absolutely correct. And I would say to be a bit more tactical, leverage these things to get a sense of where you are and where are those places you want to lean into. And then you can leverage partners or your account manager, get the conversation started to figure out how do you then go about maturing. And alongside of this, you're going to be building your internal expertise as well, but also figuring out how to go about getting more mature around your cloud strategy.
Great. And final thing, and then we're going to do a quick takeaways, and then we'll take questions from the audience. We have a microphone right up here. If anybody would like to jump up and ask a question to our panelists. So, final item here: advisory companies possibly seeking funding or an equity event of some sort in 2023. You want to go first?
It comes back again to customer value. I think you need to be heads down, focusing on ensuring that you're delivering real value to your customers that's differentiated and is worth the pain for them to adopt a new technology. The second thing I'll say is efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. It's really about being efficient in every phase of the company, from a product development perspective, from a go-to-market perspective, right? From an operational perspective. And the third, I think, is about your team and your employees. They are what makes the company, and I think sometimes it's hard. It's easy to forget when you're in the heat of battle because things are moving so fast. Just make sure that you're, as we talked about the NPS point, both internally and externally, you're really, really close to that. I think great companies are built on top of leaders who really understand the people aspects of things. So I'll leave it short and sweet that way.
That's a great wrap up.
So I would say, being very deliberate about your cloud strategy and the message and understanding how these things line. I know I've already mentioned it, but it's such an important point. Your product strategy is very key, but now you have to align all the pieces around it to understand how your technology roadmap and your product roadmap and your strategy is going to align to build and actually make sure there's confidence that you can execute on that. And when it comes specifically around, looking forward to potentially discussions on your cloud strategy and how does that enable your company, I think it's very important to have very good awareness of where you are. So we don't expect everyone to be polished and have everything, but having that awareness and being deliberate from the beginning about how you're going to go about building some of these core pillars around your cloud. So it's security, it's extensibility, how are you able to scale, it's cloud cost management and cost efficiency, creating that vision and that story, and then understanding the areas that you have to go and improve. That's what we look for. We want to understand, do you have something in place today that we can invest in and pull more levers to mature it and to grow it? but also are you very aware of where it fits and the work you're going to have to do? I've yet to see a company that has everything done, so there's always going to be something. So that's,
Sure.
the advice that I have is build that story and alignment across your leadership, across your strategies, and understanding your costs and how that will grow along with your platform. And that presents with a very good understanding of what we're looking at and how do we then enable and partner to get there.
So a pervasive lack of awareness would be a good red flag to avoid.
Yeah, I would say that would be a good one. And then not aligning what you're doing. And it's not just, it's a leadership side too, and you talk about the people. It's really, do you have the right team to go do what you're doing? Do you have the right, and not just from leadership, but underneath as well.
Yeah.
But does this all make a cohesive story? An example I've seen is, we were talking to a company, they presented for a good 2 hours about how they're about to go global, they're going to be able to span into regions. Then we find out that they have millions and lines of code in store procedures. They've not started any of this, and it's on their roadmap to just attack it today. And this is like a multi-year journey. This is not going to happen overnight. And so that actually, for us, was like, okay, we need to step back and understand, how do we get this done? And should that even be in our thesis? Because while they want to do this, we need to understand what's realistic to go do. So I see that as things to really have alignment on across your teams, across your leadership, and your entire strategy. These things should all build together.
Okay, great. For a quick wrap up of the takeaways, and we have a picture of lunch. That's not what they're serving, but just so you could know that lunch is after this. The investor perspective is going to be dependent, of course, on your maturity level, right? And the expectations are going to be aligned with that. But understanding and organizing your costs and your risks, ranging from whatever it is, maybe disaster recovery, security, certainly FinOps is very important. Innovation is key to the whole picture. And as what has been stated over here, architecture does matter. Investors are going to have longer hold times, but it's also an opportunity to build value. So with that, we want to go ahead and take any questions that might come from the audience. Appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you and have a pleasant day.